Hey guys, welcome back to my head drawing demo. This time I'm starting off with a Viking female warrior, a shield maiden. If you watch Vikings, the character's name is Lagertha. I'm starting off with construction using the Loomis method. Her head is in 3/4 view. The lighting is ambient, which means it's going to be very challenging. This demo is digital, so line variation is absent. I could put it in there, but it's a lot harder to do line variation digitally. This is originally an 1.5-hour demo, sped up 4 times. And this is how I start, just with lines, placement, measuring. I always ask myself what the perspective is. Are we looking up at her? In this case we are, because we see the bottom of her nose and her ear. The bottom of her ear is a little bit lower than the bottom of her nose. So his head is tilted up. We're looking a little bit below her. So in the eye socket, we're going to see more of the upper part that recedes back. And on the lips, the upper lip will look a lot more full than the bottom lip. And since she's a very serious warrior, her lips are pretty closed pretty tightly, so the bottom lip looks thinner than normal. It's not like a glamour portrait where you just make the lips huge. You can notice that I kind of hop around a lot. I'm not just finishing one eyeball and then moving on to other things. I'm kind of hopping around a little bit, and that's because it lets me compare each area to others. It's easier for me to check proportions when I hop around, to see the relationships between all the parts. So this line drawing stage is all about that, proportions, placement. I mean, just because we use the Loomis construction doesn't mean that that's the end of measuring. We still have to study the reference and double check everything. When I'm drawing, I like to use Clip Studio Paint. I think the drawing tools in that software is much better than Photoshop without having to use extra plugins like Lazy Nozumi. You can draw much smoother lines And the pencil tool actually looks like a real pencil. There's like a texture to it if you zoom in, but normally when I start a piece, I like to look at it from a distance. It's easier to check proportions. If it looks good from far away, then I'll zoom in and then work on details. But if it doesn't look good far away, I'll just keep on fixing it until it does. So every piece should look great as a thumbnail. And if it doesn't, then that's what you need to fix. The big parts. Fix the big parts first, and then worry about the details later. And ambient light is harder to draw from, but I chose this image on purpose because at some point we have to tackle natural lighting or ambient lighting. It's extremely beautiful if done correctly, and we shouldn't shy away from it just because it's challenging or difficult. Getting a likeness is extremely important for work. It's a whole portfolio category that nobody tells you about until the job comes and they ask you, hey, can you do a likeness? And sure, you can trace photos, but if you don't know how to construct the face, it'll still look wrong. I've tried it before. Trace a photo and then hide the photo and just look at the tracing. It looks really weird. And you have to have the foundation knowledge of the planes of the face, how to idealize, or at least change it to what you need the artwork to do. The great thing about digital is you can make your brush as big as you want without switching tools. And you don't smear the paper or smear the graphite across the paper. So, Lagertha is a fierce shield maiden. She's not too young. I think maybe in her 30s. So I don't want to make her eyes huge, and I want to make sure her eyes are not too small. She has a stern personality, so making her a little bit more square towards the chin and the cheekbones is good. The piece of reference looks like it's shot with a longer lens, maybe 85mm, and that's why you have this nice blurred background. It actually shoot this show on location in Iceland or somewhere around that region, but they get a lot of cloudy days, so that's why we have this ambient lighting. Her hair is gonna be tricky because they have these braids. And her fur coat will be interesting to do because it introduces another texture. But this demo is mostly about getting proportions and measurements correctly. And I'm flipping the image sideways because it helps you see proportions better when you feel a little stuck drawing it in one direction. If you're doing this traditionally, just find a mirror and hold your piece up and look at it in the mirror, and hopefully you'll see where some of the proportions are funky. The cool thing about doing this digitally is I could draw lines and check myself to see if the perspective is off. And then I can turn it off, go back to drawing. So with the fur coat and her hair, I kind of want to be careful how I handle the detail, because I don't want the detail to draw attention away from her face, which is the main focal point. But this is a characteristic of ambient light, is because it's flat, or it's a flat source of light, you're going to see more details. You're going to see details that are in the light areas, details in the dark areas. It's details everywhere. So for a painting or for a drawing, I would definitely purposefully de-emphasize some of the detail so that the focal point is more clear, because we're not trying to copy the photo exact. So when I feel confident about my proportions, I'll go in and paint in the highlights. And again, since this is ambient lighting, the contrast between light and dark shouldn't be so big. It should be very subtle. Otherwise you have these weird, funny, shiny parts that don't look right. And then lastly, darken the darks and add in little suggestions of detail, like her hair, a few small strands, and that's pretty much it. This next demo is a portrait of Robert Downey Jr. with direct lighting. It's very Baroque and theatrical. It's a great photo reference. So start off with the same Loomis head construction, the basic sphere. Measure the nose and the brow, and then where the bottom of the jaw is, and quickly place in the nose and the lips. Quick way to find the eyes is dropping line straight down the wing of the nose, so the inside of the eyes should line up with that line, and then the outside of the eye is about the same width of the nose. But as I'm looking at the model, I'm constantly checking to see if that really is the case with my model, or is it differ, and how it differs, because that's what makes them look unique. Same with the lips, the separation between the upper lip and the bottom lip. That line on Loomis' head is 1/3 of the way down between the bottom of the nose and the bottom of the chin. But I'm looking at my model and I'm asking, is it really a third? Or is it more than a third or less than a third? And what are his lips like? Are we seeing more of the upper lip or less of it? Where's our eye level? And on this piece, looks like eye level is kind of straight on, and you can tell because the top of the ear and the bottom of the ear line up with the nose. His head is slightly tilted, so his left eye is a little bit lower. There's a little bit of an axis, but it's very subtle. And I'm thinking about his age too, like how old is he in this photo? Like how dramatic. I'm asking myself, how small are his eyes? If he's younger, then they should be bigger. If he's older or tired, they should be smaller. If he's older, the bags underneath his eyes should be more dramatic. The big advantage to doing digital is you can select an area and just move it like an eye. Just select the whole area and just move it to where it needs to go. You don't have to redraw everything. Or if you need to make it bigger, you can just scale it or rotate it. It's much easier to edit, so there's an advantage there. That's why a lot of work requires digital work now, or digital workflow, I mean. So he has facial hair, but I'll get to that in a minute. There's a fall off to the light, so it's intense on top, but it gets dark on the bottom. A good thing to look at here is what I call shadow mapping, and shadow mapping is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's just you're drawing the outline of the shadow pattern so that you can fill it in later. So you're creating like a map. Like a topography map for landscape. And sometimes it's hard to see proportions until you start filling it in. So I kind of fill it in as I go. I don't do it all right away, but I try to get the measurements right, and when I think the measurements are right, then I start filling in the shadow patterns. As I'm filling in the shadows, I tackle the problem of edges. What is a hard edge and what's a soft edge? So things that are a form, like his cheek, should have soft edges. It's a form. And cast shadows should have hard edges. So underneath his nose and underneath his jaw, those should be hard edges. And his shirt, where it starts and his skin, it meets the skin, that's a hard edge. Maybe some of the hair, maybe, but I think they're kind of out of focus, so they can stay soft. But all the hard edges should be like in his eyes, I think. So a detail about drawing the pupils is that it should feel like there's a sphere underneath, and the lid has a thickness, so it casts the shadow even on the white part of the eye. So the white part of the eye on top is darker because of that cast shadow. It's hard to see until you zoom in, but I do put that in there. It'll look really strange if you leave that part white. So this part is just rendering. We just everything's mapped out. Now we're just rendering shapes. We're solving problems of edges and some texture because his stubbles. And then we just let's fill in the background and model render a little bit more. His nose is like a sphere with a highlight on the tip. He looks kind of tired, kind of annoyed. His hair is a little bit messy. And I'm just adding in midtones and a gradient that gets darker towards his chin. And I'm using white to paint in some of his facial hairs. I like to zoom out to check proportions and to look at the big picture once in a while. But I think everything looks pretty good. I'm just gonna add more details on his lip. And lastly, introduce highlights. And the last part of this is just vignetting the background. So that's just making the corners darker. This is a thing that happens with photography and lighting. There's a soft spotlight on him. So there's light fall off and that just creates vignetting in the corners. That's all for this week, guys. Thanks for watching.